Hey everybody, Travis Pfeiffer here, bringing you another Deck Tech Talk. This time talking about a little mono ice action around our buddy here, Crystal Exarch. I was really excited when I saw this card. One, it was like, oh, okay, they're bringing Shadowbringer stuff in. But two, I just think he's got a really neat effect, and I kind of feel like mono stuff has gone by the wayside a bit lately, so it's nice to see something kind of supported, really in mono. And what's interesting is you technically don't even have to play him in mono, but this deck is. So Crystal Exarch, at the start of your main phase 2, he can play a forward from your hand onto the field for free as long as it equals the number of ice backups you have or lower. So if you have 5 ice backups out, you can play any 5 cost or lower for free in your main phase 2. Now, it can be a hair tricky because if they have any instant speed removal, you have to play him in main phase 1. They can blow him up right away, so that really sucks. Also, got to be a little careful because if you plan to attack that turn and you hit any bursts, you're kind of putting him at risk. However, beyond that, as long as he survives, he can just create an insane amount of value for you every turn. Now, this card isn't perfect. That you got to have the cards in hand. So I've had plenty of turns where I just didn't have any forwards to play out, so I don't even get to trigger his effect. But regardless, he's still really fun. And I really just wanted to build a deck around him, and he's really enjoyable to use. So, who are some of the targets he has? There's a lot of one drops in this deck, which normally is very unlike me. I like to have at minimum 2 of a card, usually 3, because I'm the type of person, if I have a 1 of, I'm going to hit it into damage. But there's so many 1 ofs in here that, you might lose 1 into damage, or you might have to pitch 1 early, but you're still going to have a lot to play with. And I like it because I tried versions with him where I had a lot of, 3 of a last well instead of just 1, and the problem was I would just draw those copies while he was already on the field, and so then I just wouldn't even have a target anyway. So, last well, come in, blast something, probably always going to be for 7k. Sid Reigns, still, if you can kill the forward that he hits, still fantastic. You get him to discard as well, feels great. Got 1 Black Waltz 3. Again, he's just very versatile, and he especially works well in this deck. Getting back a summon, discarding a card from their hand, doing that 7k doll. Trying out 2 copies of Olmia. She's honestly just a nice anthem, and we got Duke Larg in this deck, so everything's already going to be plus 1,000. But then when she's on the field, having Crystal Exarch be 9k, or Sid Reigns is suddenly 7k, that's not irrelevant. That's been pretty nice. I haven't gotten to use her action abilities a whole lot, but it's always there as a threat if you need it. If you need a forward that, you're on damage 5 and need a forward that can haste, brave, first strike, boom, and it comes in for all this damage. Just feels great. 1 copy of Squall. This card's kind of torture for me because I like the card and he's clearly a great card, but I have the type of luck, I always draw him early. I used to run 3 of them in mono ice, always drew him early. Now I'm only running 1 and I somehow still always draw this early. But if you can bring him in for free with Exarch, man, feels great. 1 copy of the back attack Sephiroth. He's there as a special for the big Sephiroth, but he's never bad on his own either. On their turn, bring him in, dull somebody. And again, with Olmi out, he can get incredibly strong. Hell, if he's on 5 damage and you've got Duke Larg, he's going to be getting plus 2,000 for plus his own 2,000, so 4. So he's a 10k body right on his own. 1 copy of Gentiana. And then 2 copies of Renoa. Renoa's great just because, you can flicker any forward with a nice strong entry effect. It's especially great if you can play her for free off Crystal Exarch. So maybe you Sid Reigns, and then she comes in, flips in the Sid Reigns for free. Feels great. And Gentiana, man, is a card I really love, but sometimes it's hard to get her to work. But your opponents just have to be careful because if they have any effects, that are really relevant to them, and now suddenly they're dull, that can be big things like Braska's Final Aeon or Neo X-Death, or something as small as like a Layla Viking. If they have a dull Viking and it dies, I guess what? They're not drawing a card off of it anymore. So, yeah, that's really nice. Or, even something like a Bart's Boko. Bart's and Boko swing in, even if they hit you for damage, guess what? They're not drawing a card now because Boko's dull. So, 2 copies of Genesis. Just a great staple Ice Legend. Dull freeze on entry, threaten that discard every turn. He works really nice with Olmia too, because him being a 9k, that you could even threaten for more power. No one ever wants to let Genesis come through because they don't want to have to discard, but, you're putting him at this power level where they have to do something. They can't just ignore him. 1 copy of Vayne. There are some decks I just instantly chuck him because they have no big bodies, and there's nothing he's going to do. But, this guy's been holding down the big folks since he's been in the game, and he's going to continue to do so. One copy of Emmett Selk. This card is still, it's interesting. It's a shame his entry ability isn't until damage 5, because on damage 5, he's really good, because bringing him in and paying a single ice, you can break any dull forward they have, or you can bring back Laswell, Citerains, Blackwaltz, Omia. Feels great. And he's got that stickiness to him where if they target him, he basically is going to protect himself and come back, and that has the downside, though, of that if they have an easy way to target him, it's easy to get him out of the way, but it's still nice to have a big body. Again, with an Omi out, he can be up to 11k. Crazy. One copy of Sid Alstein. I won't lie, I almost cut this guy. It's just, as much as I've even focused on discard in some decks, nowadays it just feels really hard to keep my opponent's hand completely empty. It's just difficult to do, and maybe you just have to run Scale Toad with that now, because I've just found it hard to resolve this guy. So he used to be a 3-0, but he's just gone down and down more and more because it's just hard to get there. 2 copies of Kuja, the guy you're always happy to pitch early because you can pull him back as long as he's still in the break zone, and Dull Freeze on an EX Burst is always great. And finally, 2 copies of Azure Dragon Lacis Soryu. Probably you could easily bump this up to 3 because the more cards you have in hand, the higher chance you have to play something off of Crystal Exarch. And once he starts attacking, he's going to draw you cards. And then he has the ability, he can pitch however many cards you need in hand, freeze some of their characters, outright break something that's an issue, whatever. So if I actually owned a 3rd copy of him in real life, I'd probably bump him up to 3, because he's just great, he fits in well. So these are all the forwards that can be cheated in for free off of Crystal Exarch, which, obviously based on the number of backups you have, but feels fantastic. We have a few that are above the backup limit. First being Orphan. This card is still very good, even if he hasn't felt as good as he used to, but just Dull Freeze on 2. Every turn, he's threatening to attack and freeze another. And again, I found Omia, can help him get over Broskas, get over Neo X-Death. When Omia is out, okay, he can survive a Broska hit now, whereas beforehand he would always die to it. Feels really good. And then 3 copies of Big Bad Sephiroth. We'll kind of put him over that Sephiroth. He's just, again, it's still on entry, discard 2 cards, feels amazing. If you can instantly Shadow Flare, get another 2 cards out of their hand, dump that hand out, and then Dull Freeze on attack. And again, with Omia and the Duke Larg, he's going to be safe from dying to Amaterasu, assuming you can get them out. So he's still fun, he's still relevant. Yes, Amaterasu really hurts him if you don't have it out there, although you're also just junk in their hand anyway, so. And moving on to the summons, we've got 3 copies of Glacia Labilis, still probably the best ice summon in the game, just for its versatility. It's always fun to think of in the middle of a turn, like, okay, what's the best way to use Glacia? Do I dull that? Do I freeze that? Do I discard? He's just super versatile. 1 copy of our 1-cost Zalira, and then 1 copy of the 4-cost Zalira. Both are great, they break all the dull forwards. This one can be great as a big board clear. This one's nice just because it's so cheap. There's some scary stuff coming out, like Neo X-Death and Bartz and Ferris, that they're not in prime number range, so these aren't going to affect them, but still, 1 CP to just break a character can always feel good. 1 copy of this new Shiva. I really like this card. I wasn't sure what to think about it, but testing it, it's really cheap removal. It's 2 CP. And you're doing, it starts off, it does 10,000 damage to a dull forward, and then that number gets reduced based on how many cards they have in hand. So you basically always want to use it when they have 3 cards or less in hand. So if they have 5 cards or 4, it's going to be doing 5,006k damage. That's not good. But if they have 3 or less, you're doing at minimum 7k, which is the same as Glacia, same as Laswell. So honestly, I found that as long as you're casting and they have 3 or less, it just feels good to play because that's still relevant damage. And I've gotten a few times to hit people and they've got 1 card or 0 in hand. Boom, that's a 9k, 2k, 9,000, 10k nuke for 2 CP. It's felt really good. This has felt a lot better in testing than I thought. And then your final summons, 2 copies of the new Carbuncle. Similar, going with hand size, which is why there's still enough discard in here, is that if they have 2 cards or less in hand, you get to pick 2 of these effects with Carbuncle. To this day, I've yet to use the Ice Power Bump. It's there if you need it, but I just find that the least relevant of his effects. You can dull a forward, and then you can freeze 2 characters. And there's been some turns I've dulled a forward and then frozen that very forward, so he still kind of gets you a dull freeze, and I'll freeze another one or freeze a backup. So he's still been really fun to test. As far as your backups go, Duke Larg, probably one of the best ice cards there is. Ice just, generally has smaller forwards, so it really benefits from having that power bump. Plus with Omia, he's really going to bump your ice guys up there. Although probably my personal favorite ice backup, and one I just to this day can't let go of, which is Edward. On entry discard is great. And then any backup with a special is always worth a look, just because, a forward with a special, while it's good, you can still potentially play another copy of that forward, once the first version of it has died, which it probably will. Whereas backups, unless they have a heavy backup hate deck, usually once a backup's down, that's it. So normally the other backup versions of the card are just fodder, but Edward being able to cancel just any summon is fantastic. Just to this day is still really useful. And then to help him out, I wanted some more bursts in the deck. So 3 copies of Idolus, get back any ice character in the game, copy of Edward, any of the forwards, Crystal Exarch, whatever, he's on a burst, what could you want? 2 copies of Jill Nabat, freeze 2 forwards, again, I like it for the burst, and Jill also has a special, so that's not a terrible one to use just for itself. 2 copies of Cositus. Again, basically it has Jill's effect where you can freeze 2 forwards on entry, but she will also dull on entry, although not on the burst, assuming you have enough ice backups. But I love these 2 because not only are they great on a burst, they're honestly not bad to play turn 1. Like, yeah, it sucks you don't get the effect, but Jill and her can be especially great if someone has early aggression. You go, yep, freeze those guys. And then finally, a couple tech options. 1 copy of Kate Sith. Kate Sith's kind of weird because she doesn't really contribute to the discard game, because if you make someone remove a card, they get to draw off of it. However, it's still worth it because 1, it's an optional effect, so you can just look at their hand and then say, all right, no, I'll just let you keep that, and so they don't have to draw. And then you at least got hand knowledge and you got a cheap backup down. And 2, you can remove major threats. I played this against my girlfriend's Bart's Boko party deck the other day, and it was my first backup. Peeked in her hand, she had Bart's there. I was like, okay, well that's gone. I'm not going to let you get that off. So still worth it. Also going in that Bell discard, great on curve backup to play, pretty cheap. You get to check their hand, and I will say for the most part, I've used this Bell quite a bit, and I think maybe one time I didn't get to discard a card, but for the most part, they've always had some card that is 4 cost or more that I've gotten to pitch. So she's felt good. And last, but certainly not least, is Snow. Arguably the strongest ice backup in the game, depending on how you look at it. Snow is hardly a core part of this deck. You could make him more, because, Snow puts your opponent on a clock, which is that you will always outpush your opponent as long as you have Snow on the board, because they'll never be able to block you unless, they have a special forward that prevents them from being dull. At the same time, there's also stuff like Braskas and Neo-X-Death, and to a lesser extent the new Noct, stuff that when it gets chosen, it gets special effects. So if your opponent's playing a lot of that, you don't want Snow, because then you're going to be choosing the mess out of them. But at the same time, there's just no denying the amount of power he has, that he can come and just completely take over a game. So yeah, that's my version of it. I still find Mono Ice really enjoyable to play. It always makes sure the dragon is live. Cards like Orphan and Cositus, they're based on the number of ice characters you have. And this guy's just been so much fun to test with, regardless of how good he truly is or isn't. I've just had a really good time with it. So let me know what you think. Bring a warm blanket if you think this is going to leave you out in the cold. And as always, I'll leave a link to the deck link in the description below. And let me know what you think. How do you like Mono Ice these days? Do you like to try to focus more on discard, kind of dull freezing? What do you think? So let us know, and we will talk to you next time. Bye!